And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Wold, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold. And this week we're going to be looking at the 1946 film, The Best Years of Our Lives, directed by William Wyler, a Best Picture winning follow-up to a Best Picture winning movie in Mrs. Miniver, one of the most rare situations in Oscars history, and one of the few times a Best Picture winner is followed up by another Best Picture winner. Want to talk about that and want to talk about why I think this is one of the best movies of all time, a personal favorite, but I also think should be considered in the annals of film history as one of the great movies. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about Best Picture follow-ups. The movie made right after a director wins Best Picture. Oftentimes I find it can tell us more about their personal interests. What did they decide to use their creative capital of winning Best Picture on? Was it more budget? Was it a genre film? Was it something that was incredibly personal that probably wouldn't have gotten made had they not just won Best Picture? That is the fascinating part of these videos and of the series. And essentially what I've been doing is the first half of the video talk about the production history, how it got made, if there was a jump up in budget, what they decided to actually use that creative capital on, and then the modern day legacy of the movie. Did it end up winning any Oscars or get nominated for anything? And in the second half of the video, talk about my thoughts on the film, why I think it's interesting, why I wanted to cover it, because there have been almost 100 Best Picture follow-up movies at this time. Why have I chosen the 40 or so that I ended up choosing? We've been jumping around all over the place, the 40s, the 90s, the 2010s, the 2020s. Ultimately, the one commonality is that I'm picking movies that I find interesting, that I think have interesting backstories, or I think are worthwhile movies to check out. So all of the movies we discuss on the series come at a high recommendation for me. And as always, if you guys appreciate the video, make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen this movie, what your thoughts are on it. Do you like William Wyler as a director? I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with the production history of this video. And this video is a bit of a sister video to my The Heiress video that I did a few weeks ago now, where The Heiress was the movie that followed up this movie. And I thought I was only going to do one William Wyler movie, but when I was making that episode and that video, I figured, you know what, I had so much fun with that, and I love this movie so much, let's do another William Wyler movie. And like I mentioned up top, this is one of the rare scenarios. We did cover Lawrence of Arabia, which was a Best Picture winning follow-up movie to a Best Picture follow-up. And this is the other example here with William Wyler. But before we go forward, we have to go backwards. Let's talk about Mrs. Miniver, 1941, directed by William Wyler. Wyler was making movies in pretty brief succession, and then there was a big gap between 41 and then 46, The Best Years of Our Lives, namely World War II. And that's what Mrs. Miniver, I think, had the benefit of and was a critical point in American history, but also Wyler as a director. He makes this movie in 41. I don't think it's a coincidence that in 1942, at that ceremony for the Oscars, it wins Best Picture. Also notable that 1941 was the year the U.S. joined the war with Pearl Harbor, so it was a movie that was very timely. Some people call it kind of a propaganda type film. I think in terms of the film history, it's been positioned that way. It was the biggest movie of the year in terms of box office. It entered into the kind of political status where the president and all kinds of people were recommending people go out and see the movie as an example of the power of the everyday person. And I think that's what's so powerful about the movie, is that Wyler really just made it not necessarily an intentional propaganda-based film, but a movie about just the internal struggle, internal resilience and courage, ultimately, at the end of the day, of everyday people. And this was a movie that I think was a timely topic at the time, made by some expert filmmakers that kind of rode the wave of this political attention of the war, and the fact that the Academy, which is largely, I think at the time, or if not entirely American, also voted for Best Picture the war movie in the same year that the United States joined the war because it felt more topical, of course, to them. But it wasn't an up-and-comer. Wyler had made plenty of movies before this. He'd been nominated a couple of times before. Greer Garson had been nominated before, so had Mae Whitty. Garson ends up winning for the film, as well as Wyler. And I think this was seen as a classic Hollywood production by some really expert Hollywood technicians, making a timely, topical drama that really resonated with the country and therefore the Academy as well. But what's interesting as well is, okay, Wyler wins his first Best Picture win. He wins Best Director. What's he going to do with all this creative capital? Well, go to World War II. He actually doesn't make a movie. He actually enlists with a few other filmmakers and documents the war and joins the United States Air Force. And by all means, actually actively participated in the war and was flying into dangerous situations and was there in large parts to document things because he was the director, to send home newsreels, and made a bit of a documentary as well, The Memphis Belles at that time, which we don't really include in terms of the follow-up. We're just including feature films, but notable that was included there. And then he comes back and you wonder, okay, he still has some of the creative capital of Mrs. Miniver. He didn't cash in on it right away. He went to war and did his duty. But okay, maybe now that he's did a war movie, actually went to war, will he make something different? Will he make a comedy that's completely different? What's fascinating is that he makes, once again, another war movie, but a war movie that kind of sees a different side of things. And that's what's so interesting from a historical perspective, that the movie even exists, that you have a director who made many people's viewpoint a propaganda film in the early 40s at the beginning of the war, and then after the war made a very brutal kind of realistic approach and story about the difficulties of men reintroducing back into the war. Arguably, you could say a bit of an anti-war movie in just how realistic and brutal and honest it is. There is no glossy sheen to it that maybe the politicians connected to on Mrs. Miniver, which is why I struggle in thinking that 41's Mrs. Miniver was a propaganda film, because he wasn't, enlisted by the United States government to make that movie. He wanted to make a movie about, the human resiliency. And I think it's notable the fact that he doesn't go back into, 1946 and makes a movie about how great the war was and leans into that. He makes just another realistic human drama, except this point was on the flip side, about the honest difficulties of coming back after the war. And then even the crazier thing is that it becomes a huge success, just as Mrs. Miniver was, again celebrated for the realism and the honesty of the story. In the way I think about it, almost an Italian neorealist film before Italian neorealism, and how he had the actors use their own clothes and did a lot of exterior shooting and emphasis on realism and that Greg Toland kind of deep focused lenses. And he becomes a huge success and gets nominated for a bunch of Oscars and then wins Best Picture and wins Best Director again. So I think there's a huge amount of respect now for Wyler as a director after this movie. Not only does he follow up a Best Picture winning movie with another Best Picture winning movie, but a completely different kind of approach to that. Was able to capture the kind of sentiment of the country in two different ways. One in kind of a bit of a raw, let's go to war way, and then another one in a millions of men are struggling to reintegrate back into society kind of a way. Let's talk about this as it's happening right now. Take my own personal experiences having been to the war, and I think that's why it kind of resonated with so many people. It's just a fascinating kind of a movie in a historical sense, because you have a director who makes a war movie, goes into war, then comes back, makes a post-war movie, and both times they win Best Picture, and both times they are the biggest box office movie of the year, and both times they resonate culturally. We haven't had something of that scale. Even in the case of a David Lean making a Bridge on the River Kwai or Lawrence of Arabia, they're still kind of period pieces and they're big epic movies. These are like making a socially realist drama today that's so relevant to what so many people in the country are feeling, that it becomes this huge success. I don't know if that will ever happen ever again, but William Wyler was he had the definition of finger on the pulse of the country at the time, and made it with some really incredible films I still think hold up today. Which, speaking of which, let's transition now into the second half of the video, my thoughts on the film. And I really do think that this is one of the greatest movies of all time, and I don't say that lightly. I put that movie up with your Citizen Kanes or your Godfathers in both an historical fascination point of view, but also within the content of the movie itself, and just how even from a 2025 viewpoint, I'm still finding in multiple rewatches at this time, I'm still finding unique, interesting things within the movie. And what I love about it so much is that I think it is the ultimate post-war movie. It's not necessarily just about these three men and their return back into society. It's about everyone. And of course, the three men have the largest arcs within the film, which in and of itself is a feat. Fact that you only have 3 hours in the case of this movie, but you're able to tell three distinct stories and how they intertwine and make them all have these kind of emotional journeys within such a short period of time. It's not like a season of TV or anything, or it's a 3-hour movie about one person. In the case of Lawrence of Arabia, and we do a deep dive there, it's like, no, we're able to do deep dives into 3 characters in 3 hours, and that's, you probably could have done it in 2.5 hours, and that's how kind of strong and smart the writing is, and how well developed these characters are, and of course the performances by the three men. But I mentioned it being more than just a post-war movie because there are small bits that we get glimpses into that give us understanding of other people. The movie is as much about the men as it is about the relationships with their wives, and how some of the wives just aren't able to understand how these men have changed. Sometimes you get little small lines of shop keepers, for example, saying, "Oh, there's a soldier. Guess he's coming to get his job back," and kind of fears that they have over the soldiers coming back and maybe pushing them out. And even some of the older workers as well that we see with the bank and Frederick March's character, Al Stevenson, where they're very happy to have him back and they're going to promote him, and you do it from a PR perspective, but maybe don't forget to still do your job and don't give out risky loans. So there's still kind of that realism and that fake kind of corporate smile on your face, but still do the job kind of a mentality that I thought was very honest and true. So you have all these different elements as well to the movie. And then even in the second half of the movie, the war aspect of things almost completely falls apart, because it's less so about the fact that these are 3 soldiers coming home, and more so the fact that these are 3 men who have changed, and how does that affect the relationships? And we see that through these 3 different stories, one of which you have an internal struggle with Harold Parrish's character, and how he is all on his own head essentially because he lost his hands and his arms, and how he thinks he's unable to love his soon-to-be fiancée and soon-to-be wife, and how he's essentially struggling with his own demons, and even though he has a supporting partner, has to kind of work within himself. And then you have the 2 other characters, Al Stevenson and Fred Derry, played respectively by Frederick March and Dana Andrews. And you have Al Stevenson's character, who's an older soldier who didn't have as much rank in the army as he did in his now personal life and as a banker, so he has a little bit of imposter syndrome, I guess, in that regard. But more so, I'm interested in the relationships of him and his wife. But because they have 2 elder kids, it's more about a long-standing relationship and how he's kind of seen some things, and he's started to take a bit of a drinking habit, and how that scares his wife, and how there's kind of bumps and things along the road that they have to deal with. And they explore how some relationships are able to kind of come past that, and because maybe they're at an older stage in their life, they're able to work through that relationship, whereas someone like Dana Andrews, in the case of Fred Derry, is in a new relationship, got married very quickly, then went to war, then came back, and now maybe his fiancée doesn't like the way he changed. She doesn't like the fact that finances are now a part of the relationship, where he was getting paid a lot more in the army and getting paid essentially a quarter of that working at the soda shop. And then it's not like these are necessarily even one-sided female protagonists and characters. You see their kind of frustration and wonder and trying to fix things, but not being able to totally understand that. And then some people saying, just snap out of it. But of course, the men can't. So it's really about relationships so much so in that second half. And sometimes it's an internal relationship in the case of Harold Parrish and getting out of his own head. Sometimes it's older relationships in the case of Al Stevenson, played by Frederick March, his character. Or it's the case of Dana Andrews' character and the fact that, newer relationships maybe aren't going to survive, and how finances are an important part of relationship, and that can, add into resentment and things like that. So it's almost as about, change and men changing as it is about post-war. But then, of course, in the first half, it just nails so much of the specifically intimate post-war attributes that we've seen. it's just for as much as we can talk about the kind of pacing and the technical aspects I mentioned of that kind of cinematography or the structure of things, I always just come back to the naturalistic performances, the wonderfully well realized and sharp and profound dialogue. And I think it's just the best thing that art can do sometimes. It can reflect your own life back onto screen to help you see things from a different perspective. And I think that's why it resonated with so many people at the time and continues to resonate, because it's as much an interesting historical document about men coming back from post-war, but then why it resonates still today is about the basics of how do you stay in a relationship when someone's changed? How do you try to build yourself back up based on trauma or things that have happened to you? And how to kind of get out of your own head, and so much so about kind of living your everyday life, which I found really profound and very just emotionally engaging, truthfully. So I definitely think it's a movie that was deserving to be made after The Gold, and one of the best movies of all time. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this film if you've seen it. And once again, feel free to comment below and give me some of your suggestions as to potential directors you'd like to see me follow up. I know a few weeks ago we got a recommendation to do Robert Zemeckis' follow-up from Forrest Gump, being Contact. That will be coming up relatively soon, I think now. In the schedule, we've got that coming up. So if any kind of recommendations like that, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.